After Britain and France, now Iran too seems to have voted for a reformist, progressive candidate. With the election of Masoud Pezeshkian as president, Iran may see a softening of its stand both domestically and in foreign policy. It could even throw open a window of opportunity for a new diplomatic opening. Pezeshkian, who's a cardiologist, a member of parliament and a former health minister, has little direct experience in foreign policy. But he has pledged to empower Iran's globalist diplomats to run his foreign agenda, and that raises hopes of a much warmer relationship with the West. Pezeshkian represents a more pragmatic posture and less confrontational approach both towards the outside and also in the inside. But Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei would do a great deal to limit Pezeshkian's international agenda. Most of the Iranian president's powers are confined to domestic issues. It is Khamenei who, as the country's highest political and religious official, makes all of the major policy decisions, particularly in foreign affairs and the contentious nuclear program of Iran. The other leading power in the Iranian system is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which oversees all of Iran's military matters. The Revolutionary Guards and the Supreme Leader are closely aligned. They decide how and when to use military force, whether they need to unleash their proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, or even in threatening Israel. Iran's foreign policies have grown increasingly hardline in recent years, and that trend may well continue under President Pezeshkian. That includes solidifying alliances with other authoritarian states like Russia and China. Iran has been providing Russia with drones in its war against Ukraine. Tehran was one of the few places that Vladimir Putin has visited outside of the near neighborhood of Russia since the beginning of this war. Where the Iranian president may have the greatest effect internationally is in shaping how Iran's policies are viewed around the world, largely through the diplomats that he selects. And in this respect, the contrast between Pezeshkian and the man who challenged him, the anti-Western, ultra-conservative Saeed Jalili, is stark. Jalili used to be a foreign minister in the previous regime during the hardline presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad had flatly opposed any deal with world powers to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for relief from sanctions. Instead, he had pushed to enrich uranium to weapons grade. His approach, in fact, led to Iran's isolation. In fact, Ahmadinejad did not believe in the value of dealing with the West. Domestically, too, Pezeshkian wants to allow a modicum of freedom to ordinary Iranian citizens, particularly women. The current round of Iranian state repression of the freedoms of common people started with the murder of Iranian activist Mahsa Amini. Pezeshkian promised more freedoms to the voters, and they in turn responded by giving him the mandate. But it's not just in Iran. There has been a slew of so-called hardline strongman leaders who have come to power in the last decade, from Europe to America to the Middle East, on the platform of hard-right nationalism. Many of them have anti-immigrant policies, and oftentimes they've also railed against globalization. From Erdogan in Turkey to Narendra Modi in India to Donald Trump in America, these leaders upended the established status quo because they projected themselves as outsiders. They promised to correct the system, a system which they believed was needlessly being politically correct and thereby affecting vast majorities. Problem is, after a point, after almost a decade in power in many of these places, people have started railing back against these very same instincts. Both Erdogan and Modi recently suffered reverses in elections that were held in Turkey and in India, respectively. They have both been cut down to size with chastened mandates from their respective people. More recently, in Britain and France, there's been a decisive tilt towards the left. In both countries, the centre-right and the far-right have been rejected. Voters in Britain ended 14 years of conservative rule with as many as 5 prime ministers in 5 years. And in France, the leftists and the centrists joined ranks to keep out the far-right under Marine Le Pen. One main reason for this is the people at the lower end of the economic pyramid have been hit hardest because of the cost of living crisis, certainly both in Britain as well as in France. And this has been set off because of international factors like the Russia-Ukraine war, COVID. There are also local factors. In Turkey, for example, the weakening of the Turkish currency, demonetization in India, in which 80% of the currency in circulation was removed. There is also a massive cost of living crisis that has been fueled in the developed world. The solution to this, from the far right, particularly the likes of Marine Le Pen, is to throw out the immigrants. That is also the response of Republicans under Donald Trump in America. Illegal immigration has become perhaps the biggest issue in the US election. But the response from the left has been A, to join forces to try and stop the right, and also introduce measures which the majority feels would alleviate the lot of those who are stuck at the bottom end of the pyramid. For example, in France, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party has made a promise of raising France's minimum wage and also reducing the retirement age from 64 to 60. These seem to have worked more with voters at the bottom end of the pyramid. Voters also joined forces from the far left to the centrists in a bid to block out the far right. In a way, what these left parties have managed to do is to subsume the immigration debate into the overall quality of life debate. There is also the counter view to this, which is that democracy itself is at stake. A latest Pew Research study is out which seems to suggest that a large majority of folks in developed countries like America, Britain, and France seem to feel that democracy does not work for them anymore. In America, the percentage of those who are dissatisfied with democracy is close to 70%. And in a developing country like India, that figure is just 20%. Even though a fifth of the population in India lives on less than $2 a day. That view seems to show that people are disillusioned in a way with the elitist nature of politics under the likes of Trump or Boris Johnson, who are seemingly sitting in their ivory towers far away from the problems and travails of ordinary working class people. The democratic correction in Britain and France seems to be the electorate's way of saying that democracy works only if the center is strong, and that democracy is not pretty or, for that matter, electable when it is on either extreme.